Wife's friends spent months coming to our house telling her she deserved better than me. And when they finally said I wasn't in her league right to my face, she just sat there and didn't defend me, so I walked out and left her. The Black Hat. I never thought my marriage would end the way it did. But now, while writing this, I can see all the signs that led to that final moment when I packed my bags and walked out the door. My name is David, and I was married to Sarah for 8 years, before everything fell apart. And the worst part is that it all happened right in front of her friends, who she cared more about impressing than protecting her own husband. Sarah and I met in college, and back then, she seemed different from the person she became later. She was kind and supportive, and we had the same dreams about building a life together. But somewhere along the way, after we got married and bought our house in the suburbs, she started hanging around with a group of women from our neighborhood who changed her completely. These women were all married to men who made a lot more money than I did, and they spent their days shopping and going to expensive lunches and talking about their husbands' jobs and how much money they spent on vacations and cars and jewelry. Sarah started comparing our life to theirs, and she began acting like she was embarrassed by me and my job as a high school teacher, even though when we first got married, she said she admired how I wanted to help kids learn and grow. The group of women included Rebecca, who was married to a lawyer, Jessica, whose husband owned a restaurant, Maria, whose husband was a doctor, and Linda, whose husband worked in real estate and made huge commissions selling expensive houses. They would come to our house every Tuesday for what they called their coffee club, but it was really just an excuse for them to gossip and show off and make each other feel bad about their lives at first. Sarah tried to keep me away from these meetings, and she would ask me to stay late at school or run errands when her friends came over. But I started noticing that she was different after they left. She would be quiet and moody, and she would make comments about how we needed to get a bigger house or how I should look for a better paying job. And when I asked her what was wrong, she would just say nothing and go to bed early the first time I really understood. What was happening was about 6 months ago when I came home early from school because I had a migraine and needed to lie down. I walked into our living room and found all 5 women sitting around our coffee table with their expensive purses and designer clothes, and they were talking about their husbands and how much money they made and what kind of cars they drove. Sarah saw me come in and her face went red, and she introduced me to her friends, even though I had met most of them before at neighborhood parties. Rebecca looked me up and down and said hello in a way that made it clear she thought I was interrupting something important, and Jessica just nodded without really looking at me. I said hello to everyone and went to the kitchen to get some water for my headache, but I could hear them talking in low voices, and I caught Sarah saying something about how I was having a rough day at work when I came back through the living room to go upstairs. Maria made a comment about how it must be nice to have summers off like teachers do, and she said it in a way that made it sound like I was lazy or that my job was easy. I wanted to explain that teachers don't actually get summers off because we spend that time planning lessons and taking professional development courses, and many of us work second jobs to make ends meet. But Sarah jumped in quickly and changed the subject to talk about some new restaurant that Jessica's husband had bought. I went upstairs and took some medicine and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about the way those women looked at me and how Sarah seemed embarrassed to have me there after that day. Things got worse because Sarah started inviting her friends over more often, and she stopped trying to schedule their meetings when I wasn't home. It was like she wanted me to be there so they could all see how much better their husbands were than me. And she seemed to enjoy the way they talked down to me or ignored me completely when I walked through my own living room. The comments started small, but they got worse. Over time, Rebecca would make jokes about how teachers probably don't understand business or money, and Jessica would talk about how her husband bought her expensive jewelry and then look at Sarah's wedding ring, which was modest because that's all we could afford. When I proposed, Maria would mention how her husband worked long hours to provide for their family, like she was suggesting that I didn't work hard enough. And Linda, they would talk about the expensive vacations they took and how important it was to experience the finer things in life. Sarah never defended me during these conversations, and sometimes she would even join in with comments about how we needed to be more ambitious or how she wished we could afford to do more things. She started talking about how her friends' husbands were so successful and driven, and she would sigh when she looked around our house, which was perfectly nice, but not as big or fancy as theirs. The worst part was that these women would make these comments right in front of me, like I wasn't even there, or like my feelings didn't matter. They would talk about their husbands' promotions and bonuses while looking at me like I was some kind of failure. And Sarah would nod along, like she agreed with everything they said. I tried talking to Sarah about how her friends made me feel unwelcome in my own home, but she would get defensive and say that I was being too sensitive or that I didn't understand how women talk to each other. She said her friends were just sharing their lives and that I shouldn't take everything so personally, but I knew there was more to it than that because I could see the way they looked at each other when they made their little comments one day in March. The situation reached a breaking point that I still think about every day. I'd come home from school early again because we had a half day for teacher conferences, and I found the coffee club in full swing in our living room. They were talking about some charity gala that they were all attending with their husbands, and they were describing the expensive dresses they had bought and the donations their husbands were making to impress other people at the event. I said hello and went to the kitchen to make myself a sandwich because I hadn't eaten lunch, and I could hear them talking about me in the next room. Rebecca was saying something about how it was too bad that not everyone could afford to attend events like that, and Jessica laughed and said something about how some people had different priorities in life when I came back through the living room with my sandwich. Maria looked at me and said that it must be nice to have such a simple life without all the stress and responsibility that comes with a high-powered career. She said it with a smile, but her voice had an edge to it, and Linda nodded and said that some people were just meant for different kinds of work. I felt my face get hot and I wanted to say something back, but before I could speak, Sarah laughed and said that she sometimes wondered what it would be like to be married to someone more ambitious. She said it like she was joking, but everyone in the room could tell she was serious, and her friends all looked at each other with knowing smiles. Rebecca then said that Sarah was such a smart and beautiful woman and that she could probably have married anyone she wanted, and she asked Sarah if she ever thought about what her life would be like if she had made different choices. The room went quiet, and everyone looked at Sarah waiting for her answer, and I stood there holding my sandwich feeling like I wanted to disappear. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, and then she looked back at her friends and said that she tried not to think about things like that because it wasn't fair to compare. But then she said that sometimes she did wonder what it would be like to be with someone who could provide more opportunities and experiences. She said that she loved me, but that sometimes she felt like we were limited in what we could do together. And her friends all nodded like they understood exactly what she meant. Jessica then said that it was important for women to have partners who could match their level of ambition and sophistication. And she said that some people were just naturally more driven than others. Maria added that it was hard to grow as a person when you were with someone who was content with mediocrity. And Linda said that life was too short to settle for less than what you really wanted. I stood there listening to my wife and her friends talk about me like I was some kind of charity case or burden, and I felt something break inside me that I don't think ever got fixed. Sarah looked at me again, and I could see in her eyes that she meant everything she was saying, and that she had probably been thinking these thoughts for a long time without telling me. I set my sandwich down on the coffee table, and I said that I needed to go run some errands, and I left the house without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove around for 2 hours thinking about everything that had happened and trying to figure out when my wife had stopped respecting me and started seeing me as something she was embarrassed by when I got home that evening. Sarah's friends were gone and she was in the kitchen making dinner. Like nothing had happened. I asked her if we could talk, and she said sure, and I told her that. I had heard what she said about wondering what her life would be like with someone else and how she felt limited by being married to me. Sarah got defensive right away and said that I was taking everything out of context and that she was just making conversation with her friends. She said that women talk about hypothetical situations all the time and that it didn't mean anything, but I could tell by the way she avoided looking at me that she knew she had crossed a line. I told her that it wasn't just about what she said that day, but about how she had been treating me for months in front of her friends and how she never defended me when they made their little comments about my job or our lifestyle. I said that I felt like she was ashamed of me and that she would rather be married to someone like Rebecca's husband or Jessica's husband who could buy her expensive things and take her to fancy events. Sarah started crying and said that wasn't true, but then she said that she did sometimes feel frustrated that we couldn't do all the things her friends could do with their husbands. She said that she felt left out when they talked about their vacations and shopping trips and fancy dinners, and that she wished we had more money so we could experience those things too. I told her that I understood that she wanted nice things and experiences, but that the way she was handling her feelings was destroying our marriage. I said that her friends were using insecurities to make themselves feel better about their own lives, and that she was letting them turn her against me instead of talking to me directly about what she wanted. Sarah said that her friends were just successful women who understood what it meant to have high standards, and that maybe I should be more motivated to improve our situation instead of being satisfied with where we were. She said that all of her friends' husbands had worked hard to get where they were, and that maybe I needed to push myself more instead of just accepting that teaching was all I would ever do. That conversation went on for hours, and it got more and more heated as we both said things that we couldn't take back. Sarah kept defending her friends and saying that they were just trying to encourage her to want more out of life, and I kept trying to explain that they were actually encouraging her to want less of me. The next few weeks were tense and awkward as we both tried to pretend that everything was normal, but I could feel Sarah pulling away from me more and more. She started spending even more time with her friends, and she would come home with stories about their husband's latest achievements and purchases, and she would tell these stories in a way that made it clear she was comparing their lives to ours. The Tuesday coffee club meetings continued, and I started staying late at school or going to the gym to avoid being home when her friends came over. But sometimes I would come home while they were still there, and I would hear them talking about me in the kitchen or living room. They would make comments about how I seemed stressed or tired, and they would suggest that maybe Sarah needed to find ways to motivate me to be more successful. One evening in April, I came home from a faculty meeting to find Sarah sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of real estate flyers and brochures for expensive cars and vacation destinations. She said that Linda had given her some information about different ways we could improve our lifestyle, and she wanted to talk about making some changes to our financial situation. I looked through the materials and realized that everything she was showing me required us to spend money we didn't have or take on debt that we couldn't afford on my teacher's salary. Sarah said that maybe it was time for me to look into other career options that would pay better, or that maybe I could get a second job so we could start living more like her friends. I told her that I loved teaching and that I was good at it, and that I didn't want to leave a job where I felt like I was making a difference just so we could buy expensive things to impress her friends. I said that if she wanted more money, then maybe she should look into getting a job herself, instead of spending her days shopping and having coffee with women who spent their time making other people feel bad about their lives. Sarah got angry and said that her friends' husbands didn't expect their wives to work because they made enough money to support their families comfortably. She said that it wasn't fair for me to expect her to get a job when I was the one who couldn't provide the kind of lifestyle that successful couples had, and that maybe the problem was that I lacked ambition rather than that she had unrealistic expectations. That fight lasted until almost midnight, and by the end of it, we were both saying things that we knew would hurt the other person as much as possible. Sarah said that she was tired of feeling embarrassed when her friends talked about their lives because she had nothing comparable to share. And I said that I was tired of feeling like a disappointment in my own home because I couldn't compete with men who had completely different careers and priorities. The next morning, we barely spoke to each other, and I could tell that something fundamental had changed between us. Sarah seemed like she had made up her mind about something, and she started acting like she was just waiting for the right moment to say whatever she was thinking. That moment came the following Tuesday when I came home early from school because one of my students had been in a car accident, and I was too upset to finish teaching my afternoon classes. I walked into our house and found the coffee club in session as usual, but this time they stopped talking when they saw me come in, and I could tell they had been discussing something serious. I said hello and started to go upstairs, but Rebecca called out and asked me to come back because they wanted to talk to me about something I knew from the tone of her voice that whatever they wanted to say wasn't going to be good. But I came back to the living room and stood near the doorway. Rebecca looked at the other women, and then she looked at me and said that they had all been talking about Sarah's situation and that they were concerned about her happiness. She said that Sarah was such a wonderful woman who deserved to have a partner who could match her intelligence and potential, and that they felt like she was being held back from reaching her full potential. Jessica jumped in and said that they had all noticed how unhappy Sarah seemed lately, and that it was obvious she was struggling with feeling unfulfilled in her marriage. She said that Sarah was too loyal and kind to say anything directly, but that it was clear to everyone who knew her that she needed more from a relationship than what she was currently getting. Maria then said that they had been encouraging Sarah to think seriously about what she wanted out of life, and that maybe it was time for her to consider whether she was with the right person for her future goals and dreams. She said that sometimes people grew in different directions, and that it wasn't anyone's fault, but that it was important to be honest about when a relationship wasn't working anymore. Linda nodded and said that Sarah was still young and beautiful and intelligent, and that she shouldn't waste her best years with someone who couldn't give her the kind of life she deserved. She said that Sarah's friends all wanted what was best for her, and that sometimes that meant making difficult decisions about relationships that weren't serving both people involved. I looked at Sarah during this whole speech, and she was sitting on our couch looking down at her hands, and she didn't say anything to defend me or tell her friends that they were out of line for talking to me like this. In my own home, I waited for her to speak up and tell them to stop, but she just sat there silently while her friends told me that I wasn't good enough for my own wife. Finally, I asked Sarah if this was how she felt too, and if she agreed with what her friends were saying about our marriage. She looked up at me, and she said that she didn't know how to answer that question, but that she had been thinking a lot about whether we wanted the same things out of life. Rebecca then said that Sarah had been confiding in them about how trapped she felt in a marriage where she couldn't grow or experience the things she wanted to experience. She said that Sarah was too nice to hurt my feelings by saying it directly, but that she had told them she sometimes felt like she had settled for less than what she really wanted. When she married me, I felt like I had been punched, and I looked at Sarah and asked her if she had really said those things to her friends. Sarah started crying, and she said that she had been confused and frustrated, and that she had said some things she probably shouldn't have said, but that her feelings were complicated and she didn't know how to sort them out. Jessica then said that Sarah deserved to be with someone who was in her league intellectually, and that it wasn't fair to either of us to stay in a marriage where one person felt like they were settling. She said that Sarah was an educated woman with so much potential, and that she needed a partner who could challenge her and provide opportunities for growth rather than someone who was content with a simple life. That phrase, "in her league," hit me like a slap across the face, and I realized that this was what all of those months of comments and conversations had been building up to. Sarah's friends had convinced her that she was too good for me, and that I was holding her back from some better life that she deserved to have with a more successful man. Asked Sarah directly if she thought I was below her league, and if that was really how she saw our marriage. The room went completely quiet, and everyone was looking at Sarah waiting for her answer, and I could see her struggling with what to say. Finally, Sarah looked at me and said that she didn't think of it in terms of leagues, but that she did sometimes feel like we were at different places in our lives, and that maybe we wanted different things for our future. She said that her friends had helped her realize that it was okay to want more out of life, and that maybe we had both changed since we got married in ways that made us less compatible. Rebecca nodded and said that it was nobody's fault when two people grew apart, but that it was important to be honest about when the relationship had run its course. She said that Sarah was young enough to start over and find someone who could give her the kind of life she really wanted, and that I deserved to be with someone who appreciated the kind of person I was. Instead of wishing I was different, I stood there listening to these women discuss my marriage like it was some kind of business that wasn't working out, and I realized that Sarah had already made her decision. She had chosen her friends' opinions over our relationship, and she had let them convince her that I was some kind of burden or obstacle to her happiness. I told everyone in the room that I had heard enough, and that I didn't need to listen to a group of women tell me that I wasn't good enough for my own wife in my own living room. I said that if Sarah felt like she had settled for less than she deserved when she married me, then maybe we needed to have a serious conversation about what that meant for our future. Sarah's friends all looked at each other with satisfied expressions, like they had accomplished what they came there to do, and Rebecca said that sometimes the truth was hard to hear, but that it was better to face reality than to live in denial. Jessica added that they were just trying to help Sarah figure out what would make her truly happy, and Maria said that they all cared about Sarah too much to watch her waste her life being unfulfilled. I looked at Sarah one more time and asked her if she wanted me to leave so she could continue discussing our marriage with her friends, or if she wanted her friends to leave so we could talk privately about what was happening between us. Sarah looked back and forth between me and her friends, and then she said that maybe it would be better if I gave her some time to think about everything that was the moment I knew our marriage was over, because she had chosen to ask me to leave instead of asking her friends to mind their own business. I went upstairs and packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days, and I could hear the women downstairs talking in low voices about what had just happened when I came back downstairs with my bag. Sarah was standing in the hallway, looking confused and upset. I told her that I was going to stay at my brother's house for a while so she could have all the time she needed to think about what she wanted, and that when she was ready to talk, we could figure out what came next. Sarah started to say something, but I held up my hand and told her that I didn't want to hear any more about how I wasn't good enough or how she felt trapped in our marriage. I said that if she really believed what her friends had been telling her, then we both deserve better than trying to make a relationship work when one person thought the other person was beneath them. I walked past the living room where her friends were still sitting, and I could see them watching everything that was happening with interest, like they were enjoying the drama they had created. Rebecca called out and said that she hoped I understood they were just trying to help, and I stopped and turned around and told her that destroying someone's marriage wasn't helping anyone. I told all of them that they had spent months coming into my home and making me feel unwelcome and inadequate, and that they had turned my wife against me by convincing her that she deserved better than what we had built together. I said that they were the kind of people who couldn't be happy unless they were making other people feel bad about their lives, and that I felt sorry for their husbands who had to live with women who were never satisfied with what they had. Linda started to say something back, but I was already walking toward the door, and I told them that they had gotten what they wanted and that they could all pat themselves on the back by breaking up a marriage. I said that I hope Sarah's new life with someone more worthy of her would make them all feel better about their own problems. I left the house and drove to my brother Tom's apartment, and I spent the next 3 days trying to process what had happened and figure out what I wanted to do next. Tom was angry when I told him the whole story, and he said that Sarah's friends sounded like toxic people who enjoyed creating drama in other people's lives. Tom said that he had never liked the way Sarah changed after she started hanging around with those women, and that he had noticed at family gatherings how she seemed embarrassed by her modest lifestyle compared to her friends' situations. He said that a good wife would have defended her husband instead of letting her friends attack him, and that Sarah had shown her true character by choosing their opinions over our marriage. I called Sarah several times during those 3 days, but she didn't answer her phone, and when I finally reached her, she said that she needed more time to think and that she wasn't ready to talk yet. I asked her if her friends were still coming over and giving her advice about our marriage, and she got defensive and said that she needed to talk to people who cared about her happiness. That conversation made it clear to me that Sarah wasn't planning to fight for our marriage or tell her friends to stay out of our business, and that she was going to let them continue influencing her decisions about our future. I realized that even if we work things out temporarily, this same situation would keep happening as long as she valued her friends' opinions more than our relationship. I spent the next week thinking about all the good times Sarah and I had shared during our 8 years together and trying to figure out if there was any way to save our marriage. I thought about the woman I had fallen in love with in college who had supported my dreams of becoming a teacher, and I wondered when she had started seeing my career as something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of. But every time I considered trying to work things out, I remembered the way Sarah had sat silently while her friends told me I wasn't good enough for her. And the way she had asked me to leave instead of asking them to leave, I realized that the woman I had married was gone, and that the person she had become with her friend's influence wasn't someone I could build a life with. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer who had been recommended by a colleague at school, and I spent 2 hours telling him everything that had happened over the past several months. The lawyer said that what I was describing sounded like emotional abuse, and that Sarah's friends had essentially conducted a campaign to undermine my marriage and my self-esteem. He explained that while we didn't have children or significant assets to divide, I would still need to go through the legal process of filing for divorce and serving Sarah with papers. He said that based on what I had told him, it sounded like Sarah might not contest the divorce, since she had already expressed that she felt unfulfilled in our marriage. I signed the papers that afternoon, and the lawyer said he would have them served to Sarah within the next few days. When Sarah received the divorce papers, she called me immediately, and she was crying and asking why I hadn't tried to work things out before taking such a drastic step. I told her that she had made it clear where she stood when she chose to discuss our marriage problems with her friends instead of with me, and when she had agreed with them that I wasn't good enough for her. Sarah said that she had never meant for things to go so far, and that she had just been confused about what she wanted. But I told her that the damage was already done. I said that I couldn't be married to someone who saw me as a settling for less than she deserved, and that I couldn't live in a house where I was constantly made to feel inadequate by her friends. She asked if we could go to counseling or try to work things out, but I told her that the problems in our marriage weren't the kind that counseling could fix. I said that the issue wasn't communication or misunderstandings, but that she had fundamentally lost respect for me and had allowed other people to convince her that our life together wasn't good enough. Sarah then said that her friends had been trying to help her figure out why she was feeling unhappy, and that maybe they had given her bad advice, but that didn't mean our marriage had to end. I told her that good friends would have encouraged her to talk to her husband about her feelings, instead of encouraging her to think about what her life would be like with someone else. I explained that her friends had spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home and undermining our relationship, and that she had participated in that process instead of stopping it. I said that a marriage couldn't survive when one person allowed outsiders to attack and belittle their spouse, and that I deserved better than what our relationship had become. The divorce process took about 8 months to complete because we had to divide our shared assets and figure out what to do with our house. Sarah ended up buying out my half of the house with money her parents lent her, and I used my portion of the equity to put a down payment on a small condo closer to the school where I taught during those 8 months. I had very little contact with Sarah, except through our lawyers, but I heard from mutual friends that she was still spending time with her coffee club friends and that they were helping her through the divorce process. Some of these friends told me that Sarah seemed relieved that the marriage was ending, which confirmed that I had made the right decision. I also heard that Rebecca had made comments about how Sarah was better off without someone who couldn't appreciate her worth, and that Jessica had said Sarah would have no trouble finding someone more suitable once she was ready to date again. These comments didn't surprise me because I knew that Sarah's friends were probably congratulating themselves on successfully breaking up our marriage. I moved into my new condo and started rebuilding my life as a single person, and I was surprised by how much happier I felt once I was away from the constant negativity and judgment that had taken over my marriage. I realized that I had spent months walking on eggshells and trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't good enough, and that it felt good to be in a space where I could just be myself. About 12 months after our divorce was final, I ran into Maria at the grocery store, and she acted like we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. She asked how I was doing and said that she hoped there were no hard feelings about everything that had happened, and she seemed genuinely surprised when I didn't respond with enthusiasm. I told Maria that I held her and her friends responsible for destroying my marriage, and that I thought they were manipulative people who enjoyed creating problems in other people's lives. She got defensive and said that they had only been trying to help Sarah figure out what would make her happy, and that it wasn't their fault if our marriage had problems. I said that our marriage had normal problems that couples work through together, but that her group had turned those problems into reasons why Sarah should leave me for someone better. I told her that they had spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home and convincing my wife that she had settled for less than she deserved, and that their behavior had been cruel and destructive. Maria said that Sarah had been the one who came to them with complaints about our marriage, and that they had just listened and offered support like good friends should do. I told her that good friends would have encouraged Sarah to communicate with her husband and work on their problems together, not encouraged her to think about what her life would be like with someone else. That conversation ended with Maria walking away in a huff, and I felt good about finally telling one of those women exactly what I thought of their behavior. I knew that they probably all got together later and talked about what a bitter person I was, but I didn't care because I was done trying to win their approval or prove that I was good enough. About a year after our divorce, heard through mutual friends that Sarah had started dating someone new, and that her friends were very excited about him because he was a successful businessman who could give her the kind of lifestyle they thought she deserved. I felt a little sad when I heard this news, but I also heard that Sarah's new boyfriend didn't particularly like her friends and that he thought they were too involved in her personal life, which made me smile because I knew that Sarah would eventually have to choose between keeping her friends happy and keeping her new relationship healthy. I hoped for her sake that she would make a better choice the second time around. In the end, Sarah's friends were right about one thing. We weren't in the same league, but they were wrong about which one of us was settling for less than we deserved.